Hey everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, it has been just over a week since we've been out here in the garden with you guys. At least by the time you see this video, it's actually been exactly a week since we were actually filming out here. When we did our video about a week ago, we were talking to you guys about some issues that we were having here in our main garden. Some of our plants not growing as quickly as we had hoped, and a lot of our plants just being kind of yellow and just not doing really well.
We showed you guys, raised bed by raised bed, everything that was going on. We let you know that we were planning on doing some soil testing. We were going to test the pH, and then we were going to test the NPK to see what was going on with our soil.
You guys, I'm happy to announce that within just a week, we have been able to, for the most part, reverse what was happening here in the garden. Before we get into all the details of what we've done over the last week, let's take a walk around the garden. We're not going to do row by row like we did last time, but we are going to show you some of the things that we're doing kind of particularly bad last time and how they're doing now.
We're going to start off with showing you guys how the beans are doing, because honestly the beans were doing the worst out of everything in the garden. They were all very small, they were all very yellow, and they all seemed kind of stunted. But you guys, if you come in closer, you can see that these bean plants have really just completely turned around. These here are nice and bushy, and they're starting to climb up the trellis here, and so are these over here. And even the plants that were the very smallest and the very most yellow last time, they have greened up and they are just growing a lot faster. Every one of the raised beds that has beans in it, they're just doing much, much better. Some of them here are starting to run also. This one is starting to put up a little shoot where it's going to climb up. They're all doing better. And then down here, I think that this bed was the worst with all of the green beans. And you guys, look at, they're so much better. They're so much more green. And this one here is starting to send up a shoot, a little tendril, and this one is actually climbing. So this is just a tremendous difference in 1 week. We're so happy and encouraged.
The other thing that was really struggling when we talked to you last week was squash. All of the plants were super yellow. All of them, again, just like the beans, almost seemed stunted. But now look at them. Within 1 week, some of these, like this plant, I think is almost doubled in size in a week. They're no longer yellow. They're a nice deep green. You guys, and that's happening in all of the squash beds. So this is our patty pan squash over here. This is our lemon squash. Now these plants are a lot smaller, but these plants will be smaller even when they're full grown. And these were really tiny last week, so they are starting to grow. You can see lots of new growth on them. That's exciting. And then down here, this is our zucchini. The zucchini was really struggling out here. It was really yellow, and now it's a nice deep green, and it is finally starting to take off. So exciting news about all of the squash. Now, one bad thing, over the last week, we have started to find some squash bugs, but at this stage, we can just pick them off. We've been out here every night picking off squash bugs, and we'll just do the best that we can to keep them free of the squash bugs so that they can start to grow up. Now, another thing that has been really struggling but is finally starting to come back is the okra. Now, okra always starts off slow. Every year, no matter how good of a season we end up having, I'm always concerned that the okra isn't going to do well. So I know that this is going to start slow, but you guys, last week, these actually looked like they were dying. And now they're getting new growth. They're nice and green. I'm actually going to thin these out soon. I need to cut one of these. I was just trying to see which one's going to come back the best. And so I'll thin these out so that there's 3 okra plants in each of these beds. And then look, we have basil planted on the sides. Last week, these also looked almost like they were dying. They were really yellow. And you guys, basil should never be yellow. Now it's a nice deep green. So exciting that everything is just totally springing back.
I was also really concerned about the strawberry plants in these 3 beds. Now, we've never really grown strawberries before, so I didn't really know what to expect, but it seemed like the plants should be bigger and growing faster. Within the last week, you guys, we've had tons of new growth, and every single one of the beds has started to put out the baby runners. And so all of these beds have them, and all of that change was within the last week. I'm so relieved that the strawberries are doing well because I love them, and I really want this to go well.
The last thing I want to show you before we go sit down for a little bit and talk to you about what we've done are tomatoes. Last week I shared with you that some of the tomatoes were doing okay. None of them were doing great, but some were doing okay and some were not doing well at all. This plant here is a variety called Geranium Kiss. These are a short kind of bush tomato. They were doing okay last week. Not great, but okay. But you guys, since we've started doing what we're doing, they have really greened up, really started to grow, and tons of new blossoms over here, and even starting to get some tomatoes on now. These will put on like a golf ball sized tomato, and it's supposed to be super prolific. And then here, these were the ones that were doing really poorly last week. These are the spoon tomatoes, and they have really grown in the last week, and they are also getting just a ton of blossoms. In fact, and here's a little bitty tomato right here. So you guys, these are going to be exciting to try. I do need to get out here and tie them up to the trellis here soon so that they start to climb up, but I'm really excited about the turnaround that has happened with the tomatoes. So let's go sit down for a minute. We want to talk to you about what we've been doing, and then we're going to head over to the greenhouse because we're going to do our very first green bean harvest of the year in the greenhouse tonight. So before we get into what ended up being the solution to our problem, let's take a little bit of a step back and talk about the soil test that we did and then kind of where that led us to figure out the solution. So we shared with you guys last week that we were going to do a soil test. If you weren't around last fall when we filled all of these raised beds, we filled these raised beds with organic compost that we bought from a local company. We had it delivered in bulk. We were able to use the tractor to fill all of these up. And you guys, this is really good organic compost.
And knowing that it's organic, we know that there's not an herbicide issue here. This compost was OMRI approved. It was tested by the company as being organic, so we were not worried that it was an herbicide issue.
Because a lot of you had expressed concern that maybe there was something like Grazon or something like that mixed into the compost. We're confident that that is not the case, not only because we trust the source that we got it from, but also because the plants really weren't acting like that. If that were the case, they pretty much would have germinated and died.
Right.
And that's not what they were doing. They were like germinating and growing. They just weren't growing the way they should be growing.
We also knew that the compost itself wasn't still hot. It wasn't still actively processing, basically.
Right.
We got that compost delivered in the fall so that we could put it in the bed so that if it still had some composting to do, it would be able to do that in the fall and over the winter and in the early spring.
Right.
And honestly, the plants were not acting also like the compost was still hot.
Right. Yeah, we're confident that that was not the issue. So we were convinced that when we did a soil test, now I'll tell you, we just did a home soil test, which isn't as accurate as sending one off to a lab. Like, we test our hayfield every couple of years so we know what fertilizer to use out in the hayfield. And when we do that, we send it off to a lab, a state lab, where they test the soil, and they will give us the results back. But that takes normally about a month to get those results back. We knew that here in the garden, we didn't have a month to wait. If we would have waited a month to get results back, we would have lost our garden.
Right.
So we decided to do a home test, which, again, isn't as accurate, but it does give you at least a glimpse into what's going on.
Right.
So we tested, and we were certain that we were going to find something on that soil test. Either the pH was going to be really far off in one way or the other, or the NPK was going to be off on one of those three things. And you guys, the truth is that none of those things tested as being off.
Right.
The pH was, I think, right around 7, so that was pretty
fine.
neutral.
Yeah.
Right. And all of the other values tested what were kind of in the like satisfactory range.
Yeah,
Like
adequate.
yeah, that's the word
That was
they
the word,
used.
yeah, adequate.
Adequate. So, you know, it wasn't really high, it wasn't like super nutrient dense, but it certainly was enough that the plants should have been doing okay.
So we started looking at articles about compost, like new compost, basically fresh but already done composting compost, and like what is going on? Is it completely void of nutrients? Like we all think of, hey, you add compost to your garden and that is what feeds your plants. That's what
Right.
what brings up the, you know, bionutrients and all that kind of stuff of your garden. So having raised beds of 100% compost, that just sounds like a really great thing.
Right. And the fact that we did a test
Right.
and it said that all of those nutrients were in there,
Yeah.
we still couldn't figure it out.
Come to find out that new compost, the nutrients, the NPK and everything else in it, within the first year, it's not yet in a form that is bioavailable to the plants.
Right.
So the plants can't get that nutrients from the compost because it's not ready enough, I guess.
Right. Yeah. It's like it's kind of like slow release
Right.
at that point. It's
Right.
still kind of I don't know all the science stuff behind it, but it's not bioavailable to the roots of the plants. It's there, the plants just can't use it yet.
And what I also read is that after 1 year, those nutrients start becoming available, but only at like 25% of its full capacity.
Right. So really it will take several years before this compost is really at kind of its richest
Right.
for these plants.
Yeah, so in the meantime, number one, we needed to find a solution for immediate, and we also need to start thinking of a plan for solutions for going
the next
forward.
few years.
Yes.
Right. So at that point, once we figured that out, we knew that our issue was that we needed to start to fertilize the garden.
Yes.
Now, because all of our plants are planted, it's a little bit limiting. And a lot of the fertilizers that we could use that are organic fertilizers, like things like blood meal and bone meal and things like that, they kind of are like the compost,
Yeah.
where they're not immediately available to
Right.
the plants. They take several months
Right.
before they kind of break down in the soil and the plants can start to use them. So you could put them on, but again, it's going to take several months, and we knew we didn't have several
Right.
months.
Same kind of thing with manures. We didn't want to put fresh manure on top of our soil and have it potentially burn our plants.
The other issue was, you know, the plants are already planted.
Right.
To like kind of dig in the soil on plants that were already struggling.
Right.
We didn't want to take that chance that we would kind of push them over the edge
Right.
and lose our entire garden. So what we ended up doing is two things. We ended up starting to fertilize with a well-balanced, water-soluble 20-20-20 fertilizer. And that has really
Yeah.
made a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So we're able to run that through our drip system, and that feeds the plants every time that we water.
We're also doing a foliar feed of CalMag Plus.
Right.
Calcium, magnesium, and the plus in that formula is iron.
Right.
We're doing foliar feed so that it's like almost instantaneously available to the plants, and that has been helping so much.
Right, because that was another thing that we read, is that compost especially can be pretty void of calcium and magnesium, and those are things that the plants really do need, especially things like tomatoes and peppers and plants that
Right.
you know are prone to like blossom end rot
Right.
and things like that.
Right, and the beans, the yellow in their leaves is most likely because of iron deficiency.
Right.
And so that CalMag Plus has the iron in it, and so that is what is also helping the beans.
Right. So that is what we're doing now, is we are fertilizing on a regular basis. We're doing the foliar feed with the CalMag Plus. And then you guys, at the end of the growing season this year, once all the plants are out and we can start really getting back into this, then we will start amending the beds with things like blood meal and manure and probably, you know, rabbit manure like we've done in the past. And that is when we can really start adding things that, again, can sit over the winter next year and will be ready for the plants the following spring.
So our worries have been lifted.
Right.
We are now confident again that we're going to have a fantastic growing season. And my vision for all of these raised beds to just be bursting with plants, I think that is going to come true.
So you guys, we're so happy that in 1 week we were able to turn this around. But I think had we waited much longer, we wouldn't have been able to turn it around very easily. So I think we caught it just in time. Thanks to all of you who did offer suggestions. A lot of you helped kind of lead us down the right road, and we're very thankful for that.
So now the exciting part of this, even more than the garden being saved, is the first harvest of the green beans in the greenhouse. I can't even believe it.
Right.
There are so many green beans.
And I think actually there's a couple squash that are ready to be harvested as well. And now I haven't been out there since this morning, but there was 1 or 2 cherry tomatoes that looked like they might be ready to be eaten tonight as well.
So let's go into the greenhouse.
So here are the contender green beans. Look how amazing these are doing, and there are quite a few to pick. So I'm excited because I love just eating raw green beans. Now there's already about 20 less beans than there were an hour ago, but I think we'll still have plenty to pick. So you know how it is when I'm working out in the greenhouse. You have to eat. You have to keep enough energy up to get the work done.
Now this is only one of 2 varieties that we have growing here in the greenhouse. Like Kevin said, these are the contenders, but then down at the end of the other row, we have jade green beans. So we are going to pick the contenders. We're gonna revel a little bit in our harvest, and then we're gonna go pick the jade green beans.
Well, I would say that is a good first harvest of the contender beans. That's a nice bowl full of beans. At least a couple meals worth, I think, for Sarah and I. These days, most of the time, we're just cooking for 2, even though our daughter Samantha still technically lives at home, being out of high school now, and she's working actually 2 jobs over the summer, so she's gone most of the time. So most of the time, we're just cooking for 2.
Okay, on to our buckets of jade beans. We also have 6 buckets of them. Now this is our first year growing jade beans. They're a very popular bush green bean to grow. This has been suggested to us over the course of many years by many of you subscribers and viewers. So this year we're giving them a try, and it looks like these plants are loaded with beans as well. We can use a lot of beans because Kevin eats a lot of beans. So let's get started and see what these plants have for us. Now, over the last couple of years that we've been growing green beans in the greenhouse, I have realized how much I like to grow them in these buckets because there's a lot less kneeling and on the ground picking.
The other nice thing about growing them in the greenhouse versus outside is that we don't get the morning dew on them like we do outside. And a lot of times with green beans outside, you're not really supposed to pick green beans when they're wet from the dew. And so you'd have to wait until almost the heat of the day to pick. And by having them in the greenhouse, we can come out in the morning when there's, when it's still nice and cool and pick in the morning, which has been kind of nice.
Well, and the other nice thing about growing these in the greenhouse is they're really early.
Right.
Compared to out in the garden, I think we're a month, maybe more, earlier than if we were planting them in the ground outside.
Right. Right, because in the greenhouse, we can actually do 2 rounds of green beans, which is really nice. So when these plants die off, we can do another planting and have another whole crop of green beans so I can eat all summer.
Well, here is the bowl of the jade beans, and here is the bowl of the contenders. They're the same exact size bowl, and you guys, pretty sure that the jade beans won out for quantity Overall, it looks like they're a narrower bean and maybe a little bit longer than the Contender. Kevin tells me they taste equally good, and neither one of them are stringy. So we are very pleased with our first harvest of green beans for the year. Now, earlier today, we noticed that the very first zucchinis of the year are also ready. So let's go kind of do a treasure hunt for them and harvest those. Those might be part of our dinner. Well, I see our first zucchini on this plant here. So I'm just going to cut that right off the plant. That is a nice first zucchini of the year, but I see a second one over on the other side. Here's the second one down in here, kind of hiding a little bit. There we go. That's like almost perfect. This is what you would find in the grocery store. Looks so perfect. Okay, part of our supper.
All right, you guys, the moment we've been waiting for. The first cherry tomatoes to pick of the year. I can see 3 of them that are ready to pick. These are the gold nugget variety. There's number 1. Number 2. And number 3. Here we go. The first tomato of 2024 growing season. That is really good. But again, I've never met a tomato I don't like. I do have to ask for your forgiveness, though. You're never going to believe the amateur mistake that I made. I didn't bring my salt shaker out with me tonight. I wasn't expecting to pick tomatoes. So these other 2, I'm going to stake these in the house. I'm going to eat these with dinner, and I'm going to have these with a little salt on them because everybody knows tomatoes are better with a little salt on them. Well, what an exciting day to have our first decent harvest of green beans, a couple tomatoes, and some nice zucchini.
We are super excited that it is the beginning of harvest season.
Right. And we're even more excited that we figured out what was going on in the main garden so that we can have a great season out there as well. Of course, that's a little bit behind from the greenhouse. That's because the greenhouse always gets planted about a month before the outside garden. So it gives us a jump start in here, but it gives us a nice season out there also.
You guys, we're so happy that you joined us today to listen to us tell you what we figured out about the garden and for our very first harvest here in the greenhouse. If you're enjoying videos like this, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, the thumbs up, and also remember that the best way you can help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos with your friends, your family, and on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.
God bless.